Hello friends, welcome to DotVVM Virtual Conference 2021. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and we have a lot of amazing stuff prepared for you. You will see some cool demos and a lot of new information about the things we have made in DotVVM last year. So stay tuned, and if you have any questions, please let us know in the chat. We are monitoring the chat on YouTube, so please send us your questions and we will answer everything you will be interested into. Okay, so how is this conference going to work? This is 2-day conference, so this is the first day. We have 4 sessions prepared for you, and tomorrow we will be starting at the same time, 1 p.m. Central Europe summertime, or it should be, we are UTC +2, so in UTC I believe it's 11 a.m. Not sure, but you will see it in the description of the video. So today we will be talking about the news in .vvm 3.0, which we released in March, and in .vvm 3.1, which we are releasing now. Now we have released the latest public preview, and after that the final version will be out. Then my colleague will tell you something about how to use AMP in combination with .vvm, which is a nice piece of technology. And then my other team member from .vvm team will tell you about the new features he has been adding in data binding. So any new improvements in data binding syntax are mostly his work. So well, thanks for it. And finally, I will be showing a demo of hot reload in .vvm together with the hot reload functionality that will be introduced in .NET 6, which is right now in the preview. And if you don't have time today, but you have time tomorrow, you can join other sessions. Tomorrow I will be showing how to use Fluent UI web components in .vvm. Then you will see sessions from our .vvm developer advocates. One of them will be talking about ML.NET and how to use it in .vvm, and the other one will be talking about setting up CI/CD pipelines in Amazon Cloud. So it's also a very interesting topic. And finally, the second day will be wrapped up by a short session where I will share what we are preparing for .vvm 4.0 and what you can look forward to. So let's jump right into the first session. So for those of you who are new to .vvm, who have never written an app in .vvm, or who are hearing about .vvm for the first time, I will just in a few minutes I will just share what's it all about. So .vvm is an open source framework that you can use for 2 purposes. One is you can build new applications for web using a model view model approach, which is a very interesting pattern, and it's useful in a lot of situations. So if you like MVVM, you have experience from WPF or XAML in general, then probably you will find that .vvm is very familiar to you. And the second use case is if you have old applications written in ASP.NET Web Forms, then you can use .vvm to continuously migrate it to the latest version of .NET 5. .vvm allows you to get rid of web forms slowly, not in one big update, but incrementally, page by page. And after you get rid of all web forms pages, your application will be able to run on the latest .NET, .NET 5, .NET 6, .NET Core, whatever. So as I said, .vvm is an open source framework. You can see the source code on GitHub. It's using model view model design pattern, which is great in business applications. So if you are building various admin dashboards or various information systems, anything like that, where you have a lot of grids, a lot of forms, the users are entering data in these applications, then you will probably find MVVM approach very, very good, and it helps you to make your application be testable, which is also a nice added value. And .vvm takes care of a lot of things for you, which makes you more efficient. You don't need to build an API on the server and then write some client-side code that will just consume the API and call the functions, and probably you would, in other technologies, you need to generate some clients for the API using Swagger or something like that. In .vvm, this is all taken care of, so you can naturally access the data from the database or from any other data source on the server in C# code, and then .vvm makes this data available to the application on the client side. So there is basically some kind of transparent data transfer channel, which you don't need to do anything about it. It's just there. And we want the framework to help you be productive and to be compatible even with old applications, old technologies. So that's why .vvm supports the newest versions of ASP.NET Core. So you can be on the edge, you can use the newest, the new cool stuff, as well as old ASP.NET. If you are still using .NET Framework 4.5.1, .vvm will still work there. And we have extensions for Visual Studio, so you will also have IntelliSense, you will also have all kind of comfort you are used from other .NET based technologies, so that's what .vvm can offer to you. So if you want to build new web apps, it's very easy. You don't need to write much JavaScript. In many applications, you want to write a single line of JavaScript. You will just use HTML and C#. Of course, if you want to extend the framework or build your own interactive components, then the knowledge of JavaScript is very useful. So I'm not discouraging you from learning JavaScript, but if you don't know it right now, it doesn't matter. You can still start in .vvm, and if you learn it occasionally, you will be even more productive. You will be able to do more cool things. Basically, every page in .vvm consists of two files. First is the .html file, which is our extension to HTML syntax, where you can use .vvm controls and data bindings and things like that. And C# class, which is your view model. The view model is responsible for responding to events from the user. So whenever the user clicks a button, some function in the view model will be called. And also it's here for representing the state of the page. So if you have a text box control in the page, you will have a property which is bound to this text box. So if you save your view model for later and then restore it, the page should be in the exact same state. And .vvm comes with a lot of built-in components like grid view for rendering tables with data. There is a repeater for rendering collections. There is file upload, so you just use a component and everything is taken care of. You don't need to write your own APIs that will parse those multi-part form data, crazy requests which are difficult to work with. So that's already taken care of. So let's see how an application in .vvm looks like. If you know .vvm, you probably have seen this application. It's a very simple example of what you can do in .vvm. So let me run it first. And it's a very simple CRUD application that is connected to a SQLite database. So you can see there is a table. This is the grid view control, which is part of .vvm. And it supports paging, it supports ordering, so I can sort columns and things like that. And this is a natural feature of the grid view, so you don't need to write much code to do things like that. And there is also an edit form, so I can just edit details, I can add items to my order, so I can customize whatever I want. I am changing the values here. You can see the price gets recalculated automatically. Yeah, so even when I remove some items, that's it. And basically that's it. It's a very simple demo. So let's look how it's created. So basically I have this file called master page. And it's basically the template for the entire application. So you have the beginning of the HTML, the head section, and things like that, which are common, shared for the entire application. And here in this master page, there is content placeholder control, which means the content of the concrete page goes here. That's it. I need to include some scripts, so I have a control which will include a script and styles needed by the application for me. So there is also a resource system which can track of dependencies of all those CSS files and things like that. And this is the page with the grid view. So you can see there is the header, the heading, which is very simple. Then we have a route link for creating new order. So this is also a .vvm component that just sends the user to another route in the application, in this case the order detail route. And this is the grid view control. So you have a grid view and you just need to define all the columns. So I have the column for ID, which you can say set the header text and the value which it is bound to. And by the way, this is bound to properties in the view model. So in the view model, I need to have a collection of the records. And so this is created date. You can use your own template. So I want to make a link to the contact email. So that's how I'm rendering the link for the email address, and items, price, and the edit button, which is also just a link to other page. It's going to the order detail page, and it sets the URL parameter named ID to the ID of my record. And there we have a data pager control, which is responsible for pagination. So this switcher of the pages, it's the .vvm data pager control. Yeah, so we have these building blocks where you can, which you can use just to compose the application. So this file is the .html extension. So this is HTML with .vvm components and with the data bindings. And if you look in the view model, and I can do it by pressing F7, and .vvm extension will navigate me to the view model of the page. So you can see it's a C# class. And basically I'm using dependency injection because it's not a good idea to write logic inside the view models, but you can inject your services to the view model in the constructor. So I'm requesting an order service, and this property of type grid view dataset, this is the representation of the collection I'm rendering in the grid view. Basically it's a list which supports sorting and paging. So you can see I'm creating a new grid view dataset of these records, and I'm setting paging options. So I can set page size to 10, and I'm setting default sorting. In the grid view you can click on the column headers and change the sorting criteria, but I can set this default one. So by default I'm ordering by created date and descending, so the most recent orders will be on the top. And here I'm overriding the view model method pre-render, which is used typically to load data from the database. So if the dataset needs to be refreshed, because you don't need to reload the data every time, just sometimes when they are not present in the dataset, then I'm just using my order service to provide me iQueryable of these records. And when I have the iQueryable, I can just say dataset.load from queryable, and it will apply the sorting and paging instructions from the dataset on top of this iQueryable and evaluate the expression. So if you are using Entity Framework or, I don't know, Cosmos DB, MongoDB, any database provider which supports Link, it's extremely easy to use because you will have the iQueryable and you can just say load from queryable. If you are loading data from other data source which doesn't support iQueryable, it's not a problem. The dataset also can be filled manually. There is the items collection on the dataset, so you can put the data right in the items collection, and you can read the paging options and sorting options to determine using which column you should order or page. Yeah, so this is the page with grid view. Basically, getting the data inside of the dataset is just one line of code. And here, if you are interested how to get the iQueryable, I'm in the order service and I'm using Entity Framework. So I'm using AppDB context, which is my representation of the tables in the database, and I'm just using dbcontext.orders, and I'm selecting this order list DTO, which is my model object which I'm passing to the user interface. I'm not passing directly the order class because it will have much more columns that I actually need. So I'm just projecting using select, I'm projecting the table to my own objects that are tailored for the concrete page, for the order list page. It's safer than passing the entire entity because you might expose data which you actually don't want to share with anyone. Okay, so this is the get orders query. Let's look quickly on the other form. This is the order detail form. So let's open it. So you can see the created date. You can enter or change the email address. And here is a collection of items. You can add and remove items from the collection. And as you can see, I have the form element. I'm using Bootstrap, so this is a little bit long because Bootstrap needs this div label and inner div to create a form group. So I'm just printing out the created date. I'm using text box control for entering the email address. So you just use dot text box and bind to the text variable, text property, and that's it. And for the order items, I have a collection of items in my order. So there is the order items collection. And for each member of the collection, I'm rendering this form group, which contains the selector for choosing the product. This is the combo box. So you can see it's this. And I'm telling it, okay, bind to a products collection I have in my view model root. And this is the selected value. So once the user selects a product, its ID will be written to product ID property of my order item. And if I change the selection, it means that the price has potentially changed. So I'm calling the recalculate price function whenever the value is changed. The same applies to quantity. If the user changes the quantity, I'm also recalculating the price. And there is a button to removing the current row. So if you don't want it, you can just remove it. And also under the repeater, there is add order item, which also adds an item to the order. Total price is just a read-only field. So this is once it's recalculated, it will be printed out here. Validation summary, which aggregates all validation errors from the form and display it on one place. And those two buttons, save changes and go back to the order list. Yeah, so from these building blocks, you can compose the user interface. And in this view model, I have a few properties. First is edited order DTO, order detail DTO. And it's a special object. It's not an entity from entity framework. It's just my own object, my own class, which is designed to exactly fit the user interface of the page. So I have ID, created date, contact email, and here is the collection of order items, which is a list. I'm not using paging and sorting here, so I don't need grid view dataset. I can use just list. And here in this detail, you can see there is product ID and quantity. I'm using validation attributes because .vvm supports that. So if you need to validate anything, you can just apply these standard .NET validation attributes to your classes. If there is some complex validation logic, for example, that the order must have at least one item, then you can implement iValidateTable object and implement your own validation logic. .vvm will validate this object for you before any action is taken. By default, all requests are validated. So this is part of my view model. So the view model class contains a property with this data transfer object, which is been used in the user interface to bind values into. And then when I get back, in this order detail view model, we have the edited order ID, which loads its value from the route URL. So if you look, I have the order/11. So this is the order ID. So that it will be populated automatically into this property by .vvm. You don't need to do anything else. And I'm calculating just a helper property. If it's new, it means that the edited order is 0. Otherwise, it's not new because I'm showing or hiding some parts of the user interface. I'm using basically the same page to insert data and to update data. Yeah, of course, if the process is fundamentally different, you will have two different pages, but for me it's almost the same. The only difference is that I probably don't display some order ID or something like that. There should be some visible property. I'm not sure where it's... Yeah, here, the created date. Of course, if I'm creating a new item, that means that it doesn't have the created date assigned yet. So if the record is not new, then I am just showing this form group. Otherwise, it won't be there. So here I'm editing, so there is created date. If I change this to 0, you will see that the created date is not here because the visible evaluates to false. Yeah. So that's it. And then in the pre-render on the first page request, which is important, that's how you determine if it's the first request or if it's just a button click on some element in the page. So if it's the first request, if it's a not new order, I will load it from the database. If it's new, I will just initialize the empty order detail DTO class. And add order item, remove order items. These are handlers for these buttons. So I can just, this is just adding items into the collection. Yeah, so it will just use the edited order DTO order items add, and I'm adding new items and also recalculating price. Yeah. And I can see it's twice here for some reason, so I can remove this safely. Okay, so and calling the recalculate price method. Remove is the same, the only difference is that it removes the item from the collection. And recalculate price, it calls also my order service. I'm used to not have any business logic here, just delegating all the calculations, all the data loading and saving to my order service. So the view model just tells the UI what should be done and asks the business layer of the application to do the actual action. Yeah. And save changes, it will just save the order detail. I'm passing the DTO to my business layer, to my order service, which will take care of it somehow. It's not the concern of the view model, it's concern of the order service. If you go inside, you can see I'm loading the orders from the database. If it's not present, I will create it. I'm clearing the order items and creating new ones. I always wipe out everything which was assigned and creating the new stuff because it's just a demo. I don't need to do any complicated comparisons. Also, I'm recalculating price here because since the view model is sent to the browser in a JSON serialized form, anyone could just change the total price in DevTools, so always recalculate these things before storing them in the database. Yeah, you will be sending the total price to the user so the user can see the price, but if the user sends you the total price, don't trust the value, just recalculate it on your own. It's the same as if you were building a REST API. Also, you wouldn't let the client to tell you the price for the order the user is actually making. Yeah, so this is very important for the security reasons. Yeah. And here is an algorithm to recalculate the price. Okay, so that's a very short introduction in how DotVVM applications look like. You have two parts. You have the view, which is HTML with some special syntax flavors like DotVVM components and data binding, and you have view model, which takes care of the state of the page. So anything the user can change in the page will be represented in using view model properties, and it also takes action when user does something. So for example, if the user clicks a button, the function in the view model will be called. Okay, so if you use DotVVM to build new web apps, it just fits the ASP.NET ecosystem. You could see in the demo that I was using validation attributes and things you know from other .NET based technologies. Whenever there is something useful in .NET, we in the DotVVM team try to use it instead of implementing our own versions, because of course it's better to use standard things. It's using, for example, the authentication and authorization. So if you use any kind of authentication which works with ASP.NET Core, it will also work in DotVVM, because DotVVM only can tell you, okay, I need this page to be accessible only to signed in users, but .vvm doesn't care about how the user actually signed in. So this is the concern of ASP.NET Core or old ASP.NET. Yeah, so .vvm tries to fit in the ASP.NET ecosystem, so it will play nice also with other frameworks in the same application. If you want to use .vvm to modernize old web apps, the scenario looks like this. If you have a very old web applications that are on old versions of .NET, like 4.5 or something like even older, then it's probably written in very old versions of ASP.NET MVC or in web forms. If you want to upgrade the application to .NET Core, you need to rewrite a lot of things, especially the pages, because the web forms engine is not supported on .NET Core and .NET 5, and also the old versions of MVC with the ASPX views, these are also not supported. So you need to get rid of these, and ideally, in ideal case, keep the rest of the application as is, because the application will contain a lot of business logic and things that are already implemented that are working, so why rewrite all of them? And with .vvm, because it supports both old and new .NET, you can install .vvm in this very old application. It needs to be upgraded just to .NET 4.5.1. This is the lowest version .vvm supports, but typically it's not a big problem, because 4.5.1 is a very old release. I think it's more than 10 years or something like that. So it should be possible. And then, after you have .vvm installed in your application, you can just start replacing pages, but incrementally, not all at once. So you can just select any SPX page and write a .vvm page that does the same things. And because the view models are written in C#, you can call the same functions that the web forms pages was calling. So you can use the same business logic, you can use the same other classes in your applications. It will just fit in. And after the .vvm page does exactly the same thing, or it can do it even better than the old ASPX page, then you can get rid of this ASPX page. And if you do this for all ASPX pages and ASCX controls and all web forms artifacts, then you will end up with applications still running on all.NET, but it will be using only things that are part of .NET Standard or things that are in .vvm. And both these things are supported on the newest .NET. So then you will be able to switch the application to the latest version of .NET, because .vvm will still work there. The syntax of pages and the view model is unchanged, it's the same. And you won't have any web forms or old MVC dependencies in your project. So it's a long-term process. It can take weeks, it can take even months, but still it's possible. And because it's incremental, you are not working on a big pile of changes and then there is the big release. No, nothing like that. You are still working in the same application. It will still work. It will coexist together, so you can deploy at any time. So if the users report a bug, you will fix the bug and redeploy the application. And if you use the same styles for old and new pages, then the users might not even notice that both pages are in different technologies. Yeah. So the process is like this. You will install .vvm in the Web Forms app. We have a helper menu in Visual Studio. So if you right-click on your Web Forms project, there is an option to add .vvm, which is added by our Visual Studio extension. .vvm extension for Visual Studio. So just right-click your Web Forms project and select Add .vvm. It should work. If it's not working, please let us know. We will be happy to fix it. And because there is a lot of different configurations of old ASP.NET projects, and there can be a lot of assembly references that can be incompatible with .vvm. So that's what can go wrong. But still, try it and let us know if there are any problems. Then you will create a master page with the same CSS styles. So you can create the .vvm master page, which will look exactly the same as the web forms one. That's why the users won't notice that some pages are in .vvm and some in ASP, still in old ASP.NET. And then you can start replacing the pages one by one Yeah, so you can do 1 page a day, 1 page a week. It depends on how much time you have. And after a few weeks or months, you will get rid of all web forms pages. During the process, you can deploy your application at any time. So this doesn't mean that you won't be able to release the application until the migration is done. And if all of the web forms is gone, then you can just change your CS profile to the new SDK and to run on .NET Core or .NET 5. So that's how the process looks like. If you are interested, go to our YouTube channel. We have videos dedicated to this experience. So if you are interested in this scenario, just follow us on YouTube and you will find it's one of the most recent videos we have made about this topic. Okay, so if you want to start, go to .vvm.com and there is a big green button, download .vvm extension, and if you install the extension and choose File, New Project, you will see a template for .vvm web application. So it's just a few clicks and you can play with .vvm. Okay, so let's look what's new in .vvm 3.0 and in .vvm 3.1. And basically for .vvm 3.0, which we released 2 months ago, the main topic of this release was to allow doing more things on the client side. Yeah, so because every click on button, if you are using the classic command binding, means that .vvm will take the view model, send it to the server, the function is executed, and then the changes made to the view model are sent back to the browser. If you want to be able to do some things offline, if you want to do some things which some trivial updates to the view model without communicating to the server, this .vvm 3.0 and 3.1 contains many things that will help you with. There is also integration with JavaScript using the JS directive, so you will show a demo for you will see a demo for it. There is new syntax extensions in data binding, so if you want to write any code in the data binding expression, it's more powerful than in the previous version. So if you are interested, wait for the next session, because my colleague will be talking about his work on the data bindings. We have also done a lot of improvements on the client side. If you write JavaScripts which interact with .vvm view model in the page, now you will have, I would say, better safety. You won't be able to break the view model, hopefully, into some very weird state when things start, when things stop work. And we have npm package with TypeScript definitions, and there is a lot of other things. If you are interested, go on our GitHub, and there is a link to a release notes for 3.0. There is a lot of changes. Many of these are just simple improvements, but there are few large features. So let's see the first one, the JS directive. One of the very frequent feedback we were getting was, okay, I like .vvm, it helps me with a lot of things, but I also want to use some third-party JavaScript control. How do I integrate these two together so I can still use .vvm, but I can pass some values from the view model to the JavaScript code, and also if something happens in the control, I want to integrate it back to .vvm. So that was the feedback we are getting from our internal teams that are using .vvm on the real projects, also from our customers. So basically, JS directives allows you to import a JavaScript module in the page and communicate between JavaScript and .vvm part in both ways. Yeah, so you can, for example, you can change the view model from the client side. There is a JavaScript API you can use to manipulate with things with the view model. You can also call any custom API. It's also a very frequent scenario. Or you just want to use some third-party library or control. So the first thing you need to do is to import this JS module by using the @JS directive at the top of the page. That's what gave the name to this feature. And once you do it, you will be able to interact between those two parts. So first part, if you, for example, have a button and want to call some JavaScript function from it, and it doesn't need to be a button, because for button you can just use button on click equals and some piece of JavaScript. But if you want to pass some values from the view model to this JavaScript function, it's then not so easy, so this still helps. But also you can respond to, I don't know, selection changed on the combo box you have seen in the previous demos and things like that. So whenever you can write a command in .vvm, you can call functions from your JS imported module. So basically there is a new function called JS invoke, and here there is a function name in JavaScript. Unfortunately there is no IntelliSense because it's very difficult to understand what will actually be present in the JavaScript object when the module is loaded. So you need to pass the function name as a string, and of course you can make a typo here. And then you can pass any number of parameters to the function, and these are just expressions from your view model. So I'm just taking here latitude and longitude and send it to the function. And in the JavaScript file, you need to do two things. First is to provide a factory for the module, which is basically this export default function. This is a function, it's a lambda. .vvm will pass the context variable, which is object, you will see later, and the function needs to return a new instance of the module. So I'm creating new dashboard module instance, and in this class I'm just backing up the context, so I have it available there. And then in this object you can define functions. So here's my add marker function, which gets two parameters, latitude, longitude, as same as here, and you can do anything with these values. Yeah, so I'm initializing a marker on Google Maps, for example. So that's the way from .vvm to JavaScript. You have some .vvm UI control and you want to call JavaScript. So this is how you can do it. And sometimes you need to do opposite thing. For example, if the user clicks on the marker in the map, you need to notify .vvm, okay, something has changed, do something in the view model or send something to the server. Yeah, so you need to do some kind of action based on a JavaScript event. So basically, in your event handler, you can do this. You can use the context object that was passed to the module. You can use it, and there is the named commands collection or named commands object, which contains any functions that you will expose like this. So I'm using the named command control in .vvm. Yeah, you need to specify the name and you need to specify the command. So here you will specify, okay, it's a command, I will be calling a function on the server, and you can pass parameters. That's because we support lambdas in command bindings, you can pass parameters to these commands. So you will say, okay, I need one parameter of type integer and I'm calling this function in my view model. You can also use a static command here, so you don't need to just do a full post back to the server. You can just do any other thing. It's just a command. And so I'm calling this function and I'm passing marker ID to this ID parameter. Yeah, so you just need to make sure that you are passing the correct types and correct numbers of arguments. There is no checks on the compile time. You will see in the runtime if you have done it wrong. But if the name matches and the parameters match, then this will be called. Yeah? And also it returns a promise. So if, for example, the user went offline and this call was unsuccessful, you will get a JavaScript error and you can, for example, show some error message or something like that. Yeah? So you also are aware of whether and when the command actually succeeded or failed and how long it take. Yeah, so and because we are using modern JavaScript, this feature is not supported in old Internet Explorer. You can also use new syntax features in JavaScript like async await. So this function is async, and because this is promise, I can await it. Yeah, that's also a very nice thing. Okay, the JS directive, there is a few more notes to this feature. Definitely check it out and try it. You can have multiple modules registered per page or per master page or per markup control. Basically everything which you can write in the OT HTML syntax. In all these files you can import your JS module, but be careful, this module is accessible only from the markup where it's registered. Yeah, so if you, for example, use the module in a markup control, and then you use this same markup control twice on a page, there will be actually two instances of the module object. Yeah, so if you store something in one of them, the second will not see it because it's scoped to the instance of the markup file. Yeah, so but it also helps you to make things universal, because actually if you want to create independent control which would work everywhere, it's quite useful that it has its own scope and nobody else can tamper with its scope. Yeah, so be careful that there can actually exist multiple instances of the modules. For example, if you are using single page apps and you import some module in the master page, its instance will be alive for the entire time the user is in the application, because parts of the master page are still in the browser. So while the markup is still present in the browser, then also the module exists. Basically, the module is destroyed once its related piece of markup disappears from the browser. Yeah. So and the module has to have the default export, and it's a function that will get the context parameter, and it needs to return the instance of the module. And it must be ECMAScript module, yeah, so it must use the native export import syntax presented in ES6. So that's the reason why it's not supported on Internet Explorer 11, because IE 11 doesn't support ES modules. Also, be careful if you are using Webpack. Webpack can consume ES modules, but it cannot produce output in the ES modules syntax. So you will be able to take these modules and bundle them together, but what the Webpack spits out is not compatible with .vvm module loader. That's what we are planning to improve in the next versions, but right now if you are using Webpack, it's not possible to bundle these modules through Webpack, so you need to exclude them from the Webpack workflow or use some other module bundler, for example Rollup. It works very well and we are using it everywhere. Okay, let's look at the demo of JS modules. And here we have a sample application. It has multiple versions. The same project is here in also in a Rollup variant, and also in the Webpack, which, as I said, it doesn't work, but it's prepared because once we introduce support for Webpack, it will just start working once we upgrade .vvm. So, but right now it's not working. And basically, I have let me run the application first. So no, it's not this one. It's the other one. Okay, please die. Okay. Now they're both running on the same port, unfortunately, because it's the default port of ASP.NET Core. So that's one. The previous demo was blocking the port for the current demo, so that's why I need to kill the console app. Okay, this is my demo, and if you look carefully, you can see that these markers are moving because I'm using SignalR in the application, and the server updates the positions of the pizza couriers across the entire country. Yeah, so that's it. And there are some interactions with the map. So if I click on a marker, you can see that this UI on the right side has changed. I can send messages to the couriers. When I send message, you will see that there is a notification, for example, and I can go back, and I can also select a courier from this list. So if I want to write something to courier number 2, I can just click on the name, and you can see also the marker change the color. So basically the interaction works in both ways. So how to create this experience? Okay, so here is my application. Basically there are a few building blocks. First is that I have this JavaScript file, which is my module, and as you can see there is a default function, so I'm exporting default function, which gets the context parameter and returns a new object. I need to register this file in .vvm startup. So here in the configure resources, here is a registration of my dashboard module. So you can see I'm registering, and now be careful, it's not a script resource, but it's script module resource because you need to insert type equals module in the generated script element. Yeah, jQuery and SignalR and all these libraries, there are just normal scripts that run from the top to bottom, but this is a script module. Yeah, so you need to use different resource type. Otherwise, the rest is the same. Just be careful not to use script resource, but script module resource. And I'm passing the URL. And also, thanks to this, you can use the dependencies. So I'm telling .vvm, okay, import this module. But after you import the Google Maps and SignalR, because these are required by the module, so the module can declare its dependencies. And I'm registering Google Maps and SignalR above that, so you can see I'm just using the libraries Google Maps from CDN, and the SignalR is embedded in my application in the lib folder. Yeah, and I'm then requesting this dashboard module resource, and it will also include all the dependencies which this module actually needs. Yeah, so this is how I import the module in the page. And now I have a list of couriers. It's the right section of my demo. So when I get here, it's this section, yeah, list of couriers. So this is just a repeater over the couriers collection. And here I have a link button which has a static command associated to the click event, and it does two things. First, in the view model, it sets the selected courier to the actual item from the collection. So I will have the property selected courier set up. And then I'm invoking a JavaScript function in the module called highlight courier and passing the ID of the courier. This will make the marker red. Yeah, so you can see, just zoom out so all of them are visible. And if I click on something, yeah, so I have selected the courier and called the highlight courier function. So this one is red right now. Okay, so if I go to the module, you can see this is the app class, this is the constructor, some kind of initialization. And if I go here, there is a highlight courier function, and I'm just iterating through the list of markers and resetting the colors. So if the ID is what I requested, then the color will be red, otherwise it will be black. Yeah, and in the constructor, I'm initializing the map. So I'm looking for a div element in the page with the ID equals map, and I'm initializing the map in the page. I'm also initializing the SignalR connection and preparing an array of all the markers. And basically that's it. And there is the communication in the other side. So when I get using SignalR, when I get the new positions from the server, yeah, the SignalR is configured here. I'm just connecting to the SignalR hub on the server. And if I get the new positions message, then I will be calling this on new positions function. And basically, I'm going through the list of markers. If the marker is not created, I'm creating it. Yeah, so it will create a marker on this position with the black icon. And it's adding a listener. So once I click on the marker, I will be calling a function in the .vvm page called select courier and passing the ID of the courier. Yeah. So this is the otherwise from JavaScript to the page. And I want to perform some action, so I need to look for the named command, select courier, and you can see the command is right here. I'm passing the ID of the courier, and I am assigning the end courier to the selected courier property in the view model. Yeah, so I'm doing basically the same thing the button was doing previously, but this can be called from JavaScript. Yeah, so that's how you call JavaScript from .vvm and .vvm from JavaScript. And of course, it can be a server command. This is just a local manipulation with the view model, which I would also be able to do it from JavaScript, by the way. But still, you can use the classic command and send the page to the server and do any kind of processing. So that's up to your decision what expression you will have here. Okay, so that's it. And let's continue. So the JS directive helps you to integrate third-party libraries, for example, like Google Maps you have seen, or anything, or SignalR, or anything else. You can just import the module and the page and call it from in both directions, basically. Okay. There are other things that we have introduced in .vvm 3.0. One of them is new syntax in binding expressions, because we basically .vvm parses what you write into the command or static command binding and tries to evaluate it or translate to JavaScript in static commands. So basically, if some new features appear in the C# language, it doesn't mean that you can use them in the bindings, because the syntax of binding is very heavily inspired by C#, but it's not 100% compatible with it. Yeah, we wish it would be a subset. Unfortunately, there are some things we support and C# doesn't support, like comparing strings to enums, but these are just tiny exceptions, I would say. Yeah, so it's not. We have added new syntax elements to the bindings. So, for example, you will be able to use lambdas, you will be able to use string interpolation, and a lot of other things. It's important to understand the difference between the command and static command binding. In case of command binding, it's always evaluated on the server. So when you click on a button, which has a command binding associated, it will just send the view model to the server, and everything that's inside of the command binding will be executed on the server. Yeah? So, which means that you can call any function. The IntelliSense won't offer you everything, but basically you can call anything because it's running on the server side. Yeah? In case of static command, it's not that case, because static command is translated to JavaScript. So for example, you can use it to just client-only manipulation with the view model. It won't call the server at all, because it can assign property plus one to a property. Yeah, .vvm will just translate this to JavaScript. Also, you can call server methods from the client side, but you will just only passing parameters to them, and you can then work with the result. So you can call a function in your static command service, and you can pass parameters and then interact with the result. So assign the result to some property. But this is not sending the entire view model. This is just sending the parameters of the function to the server and obtaining only the result, not the entire view model. So this is much more efficient. And so the bindings support a lot of new features. First, for example, is the variable declaration. It's very useful if the function needs to return multiple values. For example, if you want to return some kind of collection, give me the first page of this very long list, but also give me a total number of records. So you need to return a collection and an object. So that's where you can use variables, because the function can just return an object with two properties, and you can just then take the properties and assign them to different places in your view model. Yeah, so it's quite easy. There are lambda support in data bindings, which is very important. It's very useful for the named commands, because you need to call a function in the .vvm scope and pass parameters to that. So that's why you can use lambdas in a named command. And also it's very interesting and important because we wanted to allow using link methods in the data bindings in the static commands. So that's why we added the support for lambdas and also support for extension methods. Yeah, so now you can call extension methods in your data bindings, and thanks to these two features we can support a lot of link functions. There is also string interpolation, which is the new syntax of string with the $ in front of it. So you can then substitute values and use expressions inside the string, and they are evaluated and everything is composed together. So You can use this in the data bindings too, and we support a lot of JavaScript translations, so functions which you weren't able to use in static commands before because .vvm couldn't translate them to their JavaScript equivalents. Now it will be able to translate them. So there is a lot of operations on lists. You can add things to lists on the client side. There is support for dictionary, so you can read or update dictionary entries, and you can use math and string functions also. So it's quite useful. You will hear a lot of more details in one of the next sessions where my colleague Andrei will be talking about most of these improvements in data bindings are actually his work. So he will share all the details that you can use right now. Okay, there is another important feature, especially useful if you are writing a lot of JavaScript, because now .vvm has changed the way how it works with the state on the client. If you are on the server, it's very easy because .vvm just create an instance of your view model, and it's just a C# object in memory, nothing really complicated. But then .vvm takes this object and sends it to the client together with the page HTML, and the object is serialized in JSON. And then .vvm will deserialize it and make it a JavaScript object on the client side, so the controls can interact with the view model. Yeah? And in previous versions, we were using Knockout.js. We are still using Knockout.js, but we are using representing the state differently, because in previous versions, the state was represented as a hierarchy of Knockout observable objects. Knockout has a special object called observable, which can, it's something like property in .NET. If you know something like the iNotify property change, it's pretty much the same concept. Yeah, so observable is an object which can get or set the value, and if you set the value, it can notify everyone who actually depends on this value. Yeah, which is important to implement the MVVM experience. And from .vvm 3.0, we store the state in a different object. It's our pure plain JS object, and it's immutable. So if you change anything in the state, we are not modifying the existing state object, but we are creating a new immutable copy of the state. Yeah? So this prevents a lot of problems, a lot of issues. And also because of .vvm is still using Knockout.js, so we basically emulate the hierarchy of Knockout observables, but they store the values in this JavaScript object. And there is also a new API to manipulate with the view models. So you can use it. It's much simpler than it was before. And also all operations on the view model are validated because .vvm now includes a type information within the view model. So the view model knows that this property is an integer, and then you can only assign to it the numbers, not strings, not arrays, not any other objects. Yeah? And if you try to do it on the client, you will get an exception. So let's see a demo. I will open any website that is actually called that is actually implemented in .vvm 3.0, for example, our documentation. And if I go to the console and remove all the clutter, then previously, if you wanted to get working with .vvm view model on the client side from JavaScript, you would need to do something like the .vvm.view models root view model, and it will return an object. And you need to for example, know what's inside of this object. So for example, I have a search text here. Yeah. So for example, .viewModel.search text, and it's a knockout observable. So it's not a string, it's a knockout observable. Basically, it tells you it's a function. And if you call it without parameters, it means get. So it will return the search text. I don't have anything in the search box right now, so let's say hello.vvm, and if I evaluate the same expression here right now, you can see there is hello.vvm. Yeah, so it's getting the value. If you want to set a value, you will pass a parameter, so test, for example, and if I set it and look here, you can see that this has changed. So it's two-way data binding as we are used to it in a model view model. But of course, this API is quite long, it's not very comfortable, and if you have a hierarchies in the view model, it's quite difficult to get there, to get everywhere where you want, because if you want to go, for example, to the... Do we have a menu here or something like that? There is, for example, current page, which probably will be some object. So let's try it. For example, there is the current page. Okay, it's null. It's not very nice. For example, the suggestion form. Yeah, there is a form you can use in if you want to give us feedback. So it's and if I evaluate it, it's just an object with another things. But if I want to, for example, read the email, I then need to. And also I need to evaluate, so I will need to have these braces everywhere. Yeah, so it's not very convenient for real work. So that's why we have a new API in .vvm 3.0. This old, of course, worked the same way as it worked before, but we now have .vvm.state, which will return not the knockout observables, but it will return a pure JavaScript object. So you can see it's listed here pretty nicely. And you can see we have you can see the values right away. You don't need to invoke any functions. It's even not possible. And if you want to go to collections or anything like that, you can just you can see everything here. And there is a way to modify. That's what I forgot to mention. If you try to modify something, it's a little bit tricky, because if I say I don't know, changed value, it will do nothing. Yeah, it will return the changed value. If you look in the page, there is still test. Yeah, because the state is immutable. And also, this is a little annoying, but we are in the JavaScript world. If you evaluate the search text again, it's still test. That's because once we are returning the .vvm.state, the object is frozen. JavaScript has a nice function object.freeze, which does exactly like that. So any attempts to modify the object will be basically revoked. So the object is not possible to change. Yeah? And this is quite important, because we don't want anyone to tamper with the state. So even if you try to set something there, it won't work, it won't do anything. So you are not able to destroy the state for the .vvm page. You can still try to destroy it through the knockout observables, but since we are now validating the view model, at least for the type information, it's not so easy. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's definitely not easy. Okay, and the important thing is there is a function called patch state, which you can use to patch the view model. So you don't need to, you need to set pass there an object. And you can say change search text to changed value using patch. Yeah. So now I'm sending this patch object to the view model, and if you do it, you can see it's applied. Yeah. So .vvm.state is to read the state, but don't try to modify the results. It won't do anything. And if you want to manipulate with the view model, you can use this patch state API. You can also combine these two approaches, because you can, for example, use .vvm.viewModels root view model search text, and there is also a state property, and there is also patch state, but it's a string, so the patch state will probably, but it should work like this, hopefully. Yeah, it works like this, but because it's a string, you cannot pass an object here. If you try to pass something unsupported to the search text, yeah, because it's a string, so you can set null there, because null is a legitimate value in the string. But if you, for example, try to set an array there, 1, 2, 3, then you will get an error because .vvm won't allow you to set incorrect values in the properties. Yeah, so that's what you can see. And if you were writing some JavaScript previously, you might start to get these errors because sometimes we rather prevent setting incorrect values in the view model, because in previous versions you could do that and it would probably break on some other part of the UI. So we decided to make a breaking change here because we think it's safer in the long term, because if you set something where in the view model where .vvm doesn't know about this value or doesn't know how to handle it, it can create unpredictable issues later at a later time in the page. So that's why we introduced this validation. Okay, so this is the new API for manipulation with the view models. It's also nice. And final slides about other improvements. We have rewritten the JavaScript part of .vvm, which is quite huge, into new TypeScript using ECMAScript modules, and we are using rollup for bundling. And currently the .vvm framework includes 2 versions of JavaScript, one for old browsers like IE11 and one for modern browsers, which is using the modules and the latest improvements in JavaScript. We have also refactored the postback pipeline. We fixed a lot of bugs. So in previous versions, if you made a lot of concurrent postbacks, you might run into weird situations, like one of our colleagues, for example, who was triggering postbacks from SignalR, and there was a lot of communication over the SignalR channel. So he was creating a lot of postbacks and static commands at the same time, so there were a lot of collisions, and he found a lot of problems here. Right now in .vvm 3.0 we have also created a stress test which checked if we haven't forgot to deal with some situation. It seems like it's stable now, so that's a good news. And also, if you have been subscribing to some .vvm events like .vvm.events init subscribe, then these events now get more information. Sometimes there were some problems like that you subscribed to, I don't know, after postback, but there wasn't all the information in the event you actually needed to perform the action. So now there are more parameters. We had to remove some of them. So see the release note, there is a list of all breaking changes in this API, but in general it should more help than do more help than harm, because we mostly added more information. And there were 2 modes how to use single page applications. One was using the history API, which is support in modern browsers. And by modern browser now I also mean IE11, which also supports history API. This it wasn't supported, I think, in IE9 or something like that, but we don't support IE9 anymore. And so now the history API is the only option. So there are some properties missing on SPA content placeholder because they are not needed. We are using the history API for all SPAs. So you might get some warnings like you are using obsolete API. These properties are still there, but they are not doing anything because they're just ignored. Also for IE9, which we supported in the first versions of .vvm and which we don't support, and I hope that nobody is supporting IE9 today, we were using iframes inside the file upload component. Even in IE11 it's not necessary, so now we have cleaned up the file upload, so it's not using iframe. This will be from .vvm 3.1. In 3.0 it's still using iframe, but it will disappear. Otherwise the control behaves as the same way as before, so you shouldn't notice anything, but the hidden iframe is not there. So if you have some nasty proxy server that tries to block iframes or something like that, there's one less issue you might run into. Also, we have implemented support for aborting long-running commands and static commands from the client. So for example, if you have a long-term operation and you are calling it through command or static command, and then start another command and they both cannot run together, so .vvm will abort the request. And if you are correctly using cancellation tokens on the server, it can also abort the asynchronous operation. So if you are using async await with cancellation tokens, and you can now take advantage of this, because if it's a long request that is wasting a lot of server resources and it ends prematurely, then also the request will be cancelled on the server, which is quite nice. And we have done a lot of, and this is more internal feature, we have refactored and redesigned the .vvm command line interface, which is important for us to provide more stable and more powerful IntelliSense in Visual Studio. It's not being used by the Visual Studio extension right now, but we are preparing the infrastructure so we can take advantage of it, and the Visual Studio, the IntelliSense in Visual Studio should be more reliable because of this change. So that's the timeline. We released .vvm 3.0 in March, and the last day of March I think it was, and .vvm 3.1 is almost ready. We have released .vvm 3.1 preview 6, and it should be the last preview before the final version, and it's feature complete. We won't be adding new features in it, but we just are waiting. If there are some bugs, we want to fix them before we really release the 3.1. So but it's been quite stable. We are using it on our projects, so feel free to use it. Once we release the final version, it shouldn't be a very big change, because we think that there maybe nothing will change between these two releases, that maybe 1 or 2 commits for some tiny fixes, but nothing really important should be changed between these releases. So feel free to upgrade to 3.1 now, because it's almost ready. We don't know if we will be ever releasing 3.2 or 4.0, because we have a lot of features planned for 4.0, but a lot of them are actually almost ready, almost implemented. They are now in the review stage, so it's possible that we will be releasing .vvm 4.0 pretty early. I hope that it will be this year, maybe on the autumn or early winter. We will see. But in total, I think that one of the biggest features we plan for .vvm 4.0, it's almost ready, and we are now looking for other features we want to squeeze in. But if we have enough features that we think that it's a good idea to release a major version, so we will do it. So you can expect .vvm 4.0 pretty early. So that's about the news in .vvm 3.0 and 3.1. And now, after the break, my colleague Michael will tell you something about how to use AMP in combination with .vvm. So see you in a few minutes.
Hello everyone. Today I want to show you DotVVM AMP, but first let me tell you what kind of problem this package will solve for you. In ideal world, we would want all our pages to be written in single technology. From simple presentation pages, which are mostly static and there is no need for communication back and forth from client to server, to our complex business pages, which contain a lot of dynamic data and there are a lot of actions which user can do, which are sent back and forth to the server and back. If we would choose just one for those very different scenarios, then we would sacrifice speed. On one hand, for simple presentation pages, we want to prioritize the load speed because those pages are usually the first thing user sees when he or she comes to our web application. For business pages, we prefer development speed in most cases because we don't care so much if page loads in 50 milliseconds versus 150 milliseconds. But we want such pages to be developed as quickly as possible. So it's probably no surprise that in a world where we would choose two separate technologies, we would choose DotVVM for the business pages. But the question about what to choose for simple presentation pages is more difficult to us. We could go with just plain HTML with small sprinkle of JavaScript to give it some basic functionality, or we can go with some lightweight web framework, but then our developers need to learn two separate frameworks and to maintain two separate code bases. One of such frameworks which I would highly suggest you to use is DotVVM AMP. AMP is all about the speed. So the first load of the page or any load of the page is really quick with AMP. Some averages is around 1 second for a page to be completely loaded, and in some special scenarios I will describe you later, there is nearly instant page load times. But if we want to achieve such low load times, there are some restrictions we need to obey. For example, there is no support for custom JavaScript. You won't be able to use your jQuery to move elements from places to places, or nearly any library is prohibited in AMP. There are some exceptions because AMP has its AMP script, but even those functionalities are really limited. Another big one is there is support for only inline CSS, and even with inline CSS there is size limit of just 75 kilobytes for most of your CSS. And something which will be really problematic if you are using third-party CSS libraries is that there is no important flag available. Most of those restrictions are in place for one reason, and that is that AMP needs to calculate where will the fault of your screen be when you come to the page. So AMP wants to know which element to render if he wants to render only the first page, first part. But only those restrictions would not allow AMP to achieve those near instant load times. There are two main parts of AMP which allow it to be so fast. The first part is AMP framework. AMP framework is variant of HTML which adds some new elements and restricts usage of others. So for example, you cannot use your script in most scenarios because there is no JavaScript support, and you cannot use image, but there is an alternative AMP image tag for you. When you write your page in AMP, then it will already be pretty fast, but that's mainly because you are limited in terms of available functionality which you can use, and you will not achieve those near instant load times. In order to do so, you need to use the other part of AMP infrastructure. There is AMP cache, where your page gets when Google or other providers discover your AMP page. In order to get to those caches, your page needs to be valid. So if you break any of the rules given by AMP, your page will not be present in AMP caches. And when your page gets there, there is a whole bunch of optimizations. But caching isn't the only thing which is needed to provide those fast load times. The main part is AMP Viewer. You can imagine AMP Viewer to be just like a web application inside which your AMP application will be loaded. AMP Viewer is that part which will do the pre-rendering. You can imagine pre-rendering as AMP Viewer knowing where you want to go even before you clicked that link. So for example, if you are on Google search results, then that's AMP Viewer, and AMP Viewer will try to predict which page will you choose and load first visible part of the page before you even realize that you want to go there. So page is already loaded when you have clicked that link. That is what ensures those near instant load times. So let's say that we would want to use AMP for our simple pages. But now, what about the one technology problem? That's where DotVVM AMP comes in. DotVVM AMP allows you to have simple automatic conversions of .vm pages to AMP. The old .vm version will still exist, but alongside it there will be new AMP version of such page. Unfortunately, because .vvm uses AMP for this and AMP is restricted, there are some restrictions when you are using .vvm AMP. So pages which you want to convert have to be quite simple. For example, there is no support for any JavaScript, so the main .vm library, client library, will not be loaded, and thus there is no support for postbacks. Any communication which you want to do with the server needs to come as GET requests, when you will be provided new version of the page. Also, the CSS limitation is still applied, but you no longer need to combine all your scripts into one inline element. .vm AMP does this for you. Okay, you probably think, okay, I have few simple pages which could benefit from speed of AMP, but there's that one element which prohibits me of using .vm AMP. Fortunately, there are ways how you can annotate your page to display some elements only on AMP version or only on normal version. So you can wrap your one button which calls server with .vvm element AMP exclude, and then this element will not be present on AMP version of your page. If you don't want to go through your pages one by one and annotate your page, .vm AMP can be set in a way where it will just look and ignore all invalid elements. In default settings, the exception is thrown as soon as invalid element or attribute is discovered, but in this setting it will be just logged and the page will be rendered without given element. This behavior can be configured for only some types of errors. For example, you can configure DotVVM AMP to throw away all important tags when you turn on look and ignore for just CSS transformations or just for attributes and so on. Okay, let's try to integrate DotVVM AMP into an existing application. For this demo, I've prepared a simple application with 3 different pages. First one is the kind of page you would want to transfer into AMP without any modifications. It has just some navigation which is shared across all the pages via the master page, and some basic content like image, some HTML literal, and 3 elements from repeater. Second page is opposite of the first one. It is kind of page you would want to emit from AMP translations. Yeah, it's kind of complex page with some selection and some server-side action. And we would want to disable the AMP transformation on this page. And lastly, we have kind of simple page which has one really complicated element on it. For this kind of page, we may want to hide this part, this button, and replace it with some alternative text or something. In order to enable DotVVM AMP in our application, we firstly need to install DotVVM AMP NuGet package. Then it's just a matter of enabling DotVVM AMP in configuration in our startup. Firstly by calling add DotVVM AMP on configuration instance, and then on DotVVM service collection. Here you can specify some additional configurations. For example, you can specify before mentioned error handling modes. So for example, you can disable error exception throwing in situations where invalid HTML tag is detected. You can instead just log this error and ignore such element. But for now we will leave it in default configuration. You can also add your own custom control transformations. Control transformations allow you to create some support for currently not supported AMP controls, such as AMP carousel. You just need to create some transformation rules and your AMP carousel control and register it in AMP control transforms registry. There are many other options you can choose from, ranging from some handling of unsupported cases to custom route patterns. Let us leave it in default options for now. And this is everything you need to do to enable AMP support. Now you only need to choose which pages will be transformed into AMP and which will be left with just DotVVM version of it. So here we have our 3 pages. We have the simple one where we want DotVVM AMP support. We have our complex page where we want to stick with just DotVVM version, and we have our complex element page where we want to emit part of the page. To enable DotVVM AMP support, you just need to replace add with AMP and add DotVVM configuration instance as last parameter. In case that you need to specify something like alternative default values for your parameters URL, this is also possible via this method. If we go into our application now, we can see that not a lot has changed. Yeah, the application still looks the same, but now we have this icon which indicates that there is valid AMP version available. but the version looks nearly the same as the original version of the page. The navigation still works. If you want to go to page which does not have AMP support, you will be redirected to normal .vm version of it. But if you want to go to page which has AMP support, you will go from one AMP page to another. Here you can see that the application returned error 500 because this page contains some unsupported element. In this case, it's the button which calls server, which is not enabled in AMP. It cannot work here. So we would need to modify this page in order for it to work properly. This can be done in multiple ways. First, we can be lazy and just disable the error throwing for this option, which can be done in the custom configuration for AMP. So this is what I will try first, and I will disable all error handlings, or just set them to lock and ignore. So styles, attributes, knockout, and that should be plenty for this page. If we go back and reload the page, now we see that the page works even when it's AMP version, but the one crucial element is missing now. If we are fine with this, this is all we need to go do. But in case we want not just to omit the problematic element, but we want to replace it with something else, we can do it by some annotations. So I will delete this configuration because I want my application to throw exception when something is not correct. And I will annotate the complex element page in order to hide this problematic section. This can be done by AMP exclude. Everything which is inside this element will not be rendered on AMP version. This element has its alternative for the other operation, which is AMP include. Everything which is inside this element will be rendered only in the .vm version and not on AMP. So you can have this simple OR, one content for AMP, one content for .vvm. Okay, so we will put some text here. Okay, now when we run our application, we can see that the button was replaced by our message, and on the old .vm version there is the button back, and it still works as we would expect. So how does it work under the hood? It extends the classical .vvm view building. So at the beginning of each request you just load your .html, you build your control tree from it, and in normal .vvm you would now just send it to the server with all knockout bindings and so on. In AMP version there are some additional operations done here. Firstly, we apply the AMP transformations. So we take all rules which, for example, replace one control for another. So if we see that you are using HTML generic control with tag image, so HTML tag image, we will replace it with our AMP image control. Yeah, you have some additional operations which are done. For example, we set server rendering to enabled for all your bindings. So now everything which would be rendered via knockout on client is rendered on server. Then we are doing some transformation of CSS. First, we take all required CSS files and resources on your page, we merge them together, we parse it in order to remove any forgotten important text if the .vm amp is configured to do so. We are doing some validation, and because we still need to fit in those 75 kilobyte restriction, that's why we are doing some additional optimization and minification. So in the end you are left with two inline elements. One is for your classical CSS, which has that 75 kilobyte limit, and the other one is for all your animations, where the size limit is also present, but it's much higher. And from this point on, it's again simple .vm page. So everything is rendered on server and sent to client. And that is everything that is to .vm transformations. So in order to use it, you just add .vm amp NuGet package, you modify .vm startup by adding those two methods, one on .vm configuration and one on service collection instance. And from this point on, you just select which pages you want to have the AMP version with, and which will be left with just the normal .vm version. After this initial configuration, I would highly suggest to go to your application and see where something is broken and annotate it with AMP include or AMP exclude. And that's it. Now you have your two versions for certain pages, and Google and other search engines should give you few more sell points for this. Okay, this is everything from me today. You can find the demo at this GitHub page, and this is the link for the NuGet package. If you have any questions, just write them in the chat and I will respond to you. Okay, have a nice day everyone, bye.
So, hello everyone. My name is Andrej Čižmarik and I would like to welcome you to this presentation where we will be talking about new features in data binding system. More specifically, we will be talking about the changes that have been implemented throughout versions .vvm 3.0 to the upcoming version .vvm 3.1. So I'm really happy to say that there have been some great progress and we implemented some really nice new features and changes. So yeah, there is a lot to go. So let's get straight into it. So the first feature that I would like to talk about is the introduction of Lambda functions, or so-called anonymous functions. So just to be on the same page, in order to declare a Lambda function, you have to provide input parameters list. Then you write this arrow-looking Lambda declaration operator, after which you provide the body of Lambda function, which can be an expression or a statement. And I'm sure that every .NET developer knows Lambda functions, so it shouldn't be a big surprise that Lambda functions in .NET do not have a specific type of their own, but instead they have to be assignable to a known delegate. And since .vvm 3.0 and partially in .vvm 3.1, we basically added support for compilation of Lambda functions, and we support all the known delegates that are used throughout the base class library of .NET. And these delegates are system action, system func, and system predicate. So I'm sure everybody knows this. System action is a delegate that takes either 0 or multiple parameters and does not return a value. Func is really similar, but it does return a value. And then there is system predicate that takes exactly one argument and always returns a boolean. So before we jump straight into some examples and why this is such an important feature in .vvm binding system, I'd like to go over one more feature that was implemented in .vvm 3.1 and nicely extends support of Lambda functions. So the feature that I'm talking about is actually type inference in Lambda functions. And if you've seen previous presentations about .vvm 3.0, you've probably saw examples like this, where you can specify a Lambda function, but previously it was necessary to explicitly specify the type of individual Lambda parameters. So this is a valid syntax for .vvm 3.0, and in .vvm 3.1 this is actually no longer important or required to specify, as we've implemented a type inference system that in most cases is able to infer the Lambda parameter types from the context they are specified in. So this is the new syntax that is supported by .vvm 3.1. So since .vvm 3.1, whenever you write Lambda functions, it's quite possible that you don't need to specify Lambda parameter types. Why I'm saying it like this? We actually right now support only a subset of capabilities that you may know from common C# compilers such as Roslyn, so that our type inference system works in most cases that you will probably require in .vvm bindings, but some cases might still not be supported. So let's have a simple look on how this works. So this is a really simplified overview on what we've implemented. So as we can see from the previous example, our type inference system knows that we have specified an expression that has a target of customers, which is probably a property in view model. Let's say we defined it as a list of customers, and then we know that user tried to call a where function, which of course is not implemented on list, but instead is an extension method in the link namespace, where we know that this specific method has this kind of signature. And then our type system is able, for example, in this case, to unify those unknown types and therefore infer that the T should be a customer in this context. So this is a very simplified overview on how our type inference system works. And why I'm saying this is because some cases are not yet supported, for example, or mostly in named commands, which is, by the way, also a new feature that was introduced in DotVVM 3.0, where you specify a lambda. However, you specify it here without context. So right now we are not able to infer lambda parameter types for this case. And you may see an exception like this. However, if you supply additional type information, it will work really well. So right now, our type inference system should work in most cases, but there are some edge cases that are not yet supported, like usage of named commands. So there you have to specify these types explicitly. So why is this useful and where can you use these features? So one of the great examples on where Lambda functions can be used in DotVVM is actually client-side collections filtering. And what do I mean by this feature? So in DotVVM you can of course evaluate various expressions in value bindings, and there are some supported methods by DotVVM that gets translated directly into JavaScript code so that they can be evaluated purely on the client side, so that there is no communication with the server whatsoever for these bindings. And this is something that I feel like greatly improved in DotVVM 3.0 and 3.1 with introduction of Lambda functions and various JavaScript translations that I'll be talking a lot throughout this presentation. So I have simple examples here. The first one you have already seen in previous slides. This is just a simple expression that tries to filter out all customers with an ID greater than 0. But right now you can specify, of course, more complex expressions, such as you can display customers that are sorted by a specific property, for example. So at this point, you might be asking yourselves, what can I actually use in these bindings? So what methods do we support? And the first batch of methods that I'd like to talk about live in the system link namespace. So whenever I'm talking about JavaScript translations, we always try to capture the behavior of these methods in .NET as closely as possible, and we try to replicate it in JavaScript. So this is our goal. But of course, since there are great differences between both of these environments, meaning the .NET and JavaScript, there might be slight differences in some obscure edge cases. However, in the general case, I'm pretty sure that the observable result of these individual operations will be the same as if it had been executed by .NET runtime. So what methods do we support from the link namespace? So, for example, there are methods like all, any, concat, distinct, first or default, last or default, max, min, and even though I have written here some of these methods, there are actually a lot more of them, because in many cases we actually support multiple overloads of these methods. So later we will see the updated version of .vvm documentation where we will go over a complete list of supported expressions and methods in the data binding system. So as I've been speaking, there are methods like order by descending, select, skip, take, and where. So we worked really hard to make these methods, or better said, their translations, to behave in the same way as in .NET, so that there are no, or better said, almost no observable differences when calling these. So, so much for the link namespace. And right now I'd like to show you a simple demo of these operations. So I've prepared a sample for this. I'll first show you the sample, how it looks, and then we will go over the code. So this is a very simple application that have just a simple list of customers with some properties, and there are various operations that we may call on this list so that we will see the result here in the filtered collection. So for example, I can I may want to display this collection in a way that it's actually sorted by their that I want to sort the customers by their names, or I may want to sort by some category, or whether they're active, or by when they were actually registered at, and so on and so on. I can take the first 5, I can skip 5 customers, I can only filter those that are active or that are inactive. There is a lot that you can do with these expressions, and at this point I'd like to show you network tab so that you can see that I didn't do any funny business in the background. This is actually really completed, executed purely on client side, so there is no communication with the server whatsoever, as I've been speaking earlier. So yeah, this is a really nice use case for Lambda functions and how you can utilize the new JavaScript translations of some link methods to create data bindings that perform some operations on collections purely on client side. So yeah, that was this demo, and right now I'd like to go over some other features that we implemented in version 3.1 that will be closely related to this. So let's see what's new in the world of collections in .vvm. So up until .vvm 3.0, there were actually only 2 collection types that were truly supported in .vvm. Those were arrays and lists, and we supported something like basic usage of indexers and properties like count and length, so that you can retrieve the size of your collections. So let's see what's new in this space. So first of all, what's new with support for lists? And with lists, we added a lot of JavaScript translations that you can use, for example, from static commands. to actually modify your collections in ViewModel. And similarly to previous JavaScript translations, all of this can be computed purely in the client's browser. So what methods do we support? We support methods like add range, clear, insert range, remove add, remove all, remove range, and reverse. So I believe like these methods are quite common with .NET developers when they manipulate with lists. And we also felt like we can add some utility function as extensions that you may find useful as we do. So we implemented 3 custom extensions, 2 of which are quite straightforward. These are remove first and remove last, both of which take an only argument, which is a predicate. So they remove either the first or last element that matches the predicate from the list. And the third method that we added is add or update, which is a method that takes 3 arguments, the first being an element that might be added in case there is no element that should be updated, and the other two arguments are actually 2 delegates, the first being matcher, which tries to find an element that should be updated in the collection, and if this delegate succeeds, it calls an updater that might update the element. And of course, in the case that the matcher fails, we just add the first argument to the list. So we feel like that this greatly improves what you can do in your applications with lists. So yeah, what's other news in collections? So actually, since .vvm 3.1, we added support for dictionaries. So since .vvm 3.1, you can actually use dictionaries in your view models, and to somehow match the capabilities which are supported with lists, we also added a couple of JavaScript translations for some methods. So first of all, we of course support the indexer, both the get and set operations. This is the thing that makes it possible whenever you're accessing list through those square brackets between which you can provide a key. So we support getting a value based on a existing key from the dictionary. We of course support modifying operations such as modifying a value based on an existing key, but of course adding a completely new key value pair in case the key is not yet present in the dictionary. Other than that, we also support 3 additional methods that should be also quite familiar. These are clear, contains key, and remove. So you might have noticed that we did not actually add support for a method like add on dictionary, and this is because the add method has a specific behavior where it throws an exception in case the key already exists. So in order for us to be more consistent throughout these environments, we encourage our users to use the indexer whenever they want to add a new key value pair into the dictionary. So yeah, so dictionaries and lists. So these have been an overview of modifying operations on collections, in contrast to the operations that we saw previously, which were JavaScript translations of some methods from the system link namespace. So right now I'd like to go over some more examples. So there are some more samples that I'd like to show you. First of all, I'd like to showcase that lists actually work, and you can modify them using static commands. There are various operations. I can add new elements. There is no, once again, communication with the server. I can remove a specific element. I can, for example, remove all even elements, and so on. I can reverse the collection. I can clear it and create a new one. So yeah, we basically support the basic operations that you would require if you were to modify your collections inside ViewModel. So if you would like to see how it looks like in code, we basically these operations are quite simple. So we use static commands and then leverage the fact that these methods are actually supported and can be translated directly into JavaScript. This is actually, as I've been saying, old syntax, so I didn't update this one, so you can use it like this, and similarly to those other cases where we use lambdas, and it will work just fine. So yeah, I think that this is pretty neat and easy to use. And also the other sample that I'd like to go over is a simple dictionary sample. You can see there is a render dictionary. I can add a new key with a value, let's say hello world. I might change, for example, an existing key to, let's say, a capital value, and I might delete some key value pair and clear whole dictionary, add a new key value pair. So you get the point. It's quite similar to the list demo. You can perform various operations on collections in DotVVM 3.1 that are actually fully supported on client side. So if I were to show this demo real quick, yeah, there are also static commands, and we are setting dictionary values in simple manner like this. So yeah, there should be no surprises, I think. And from the previous examples where I actually showcased the client-side filtering, I forgot to show you how those methods look like. I mean those data bindings, and they are quite simple as well. So you just call these supported functions. There is a lot of them, as I showed you earlier, and you can perform some filtering or even modify those collections as I showed in the last few slides. So yeah, these were the lists and dictionaries. So right now I think that we can proceed to other new features that were introduced in the previous versions of .vvm. And the next feature that I'd like to talk about is an introduction of variables. So since .vvm 3.0, you can actually use variables in data bindings. and there are some pretty neat use cases that you might use them for. So first, let's get over how variables actually work in DotVVM. And in DotVVM, variables are basically of static single assignment form, which implies some rules on how you should declare them and use them. So the first important thing to note is that variables need to be declared before first use, but this shouldn't be too strange. But the second rule is more important, and that is that variables are only assignable once. And in .vvm, you declare variables always with the var keyword, as can be seen in this simple code fragment. So you always first use the var keyword, then you provide an identifier for your variable, and in order for this to be a valid C# assignment, you always need to follow this with an assignment of an expression. So yeah, this is how you work with variables. And even though you never actually specify the concrete type of the variable, it's important to note that these variables are actually statically typed. So this means the .vvm compiler always knows the type of every specific variable, and we are not using something like dynamic objects. And this should be all pretty apparent from the next slide, where I have a simple example that I would like to show you, where you can use variables. And a nice example is if you required setting multiple properties, for example, for a single button click. So we here on left side we can see a simple .html fragment. Here is a fragment from view model, and here is our custom static command service. So if we were to write a static command like this, in the first statement we actually declared a variable called result by calling the getNumber method on the static command service. This method is really simple. It just returns int, and it happens so that it's always a constant value of 42. So in this static command we actually capture the result of this method and then assigned it to multiple properties, which are of course also integers. So as I've been saying on the previous slide, .vvm compiler always knows specific type of the variable. So if these were not ints and there was no implicit conversion that could be applied there, you would actually get a type mismatch. So yeah, just keep that in mind, that variables in .vvm bindings are statically typed. You use the var keyword to declare them, and these variables are only assignable once, and it's right when you declare them. So yeah, I think this is a pretty interesting feature for .vvm data binding system, and I think that we can proceed to the next item on the list. So the next topic that I'd like to talk about is strings. So undeniably, strings are really important in many environments and runtimes. So it's quite apparent that developers work with strings a lot. So we felt like it would be a good idea to introduce some new features that would simplify the use of strings or allow for some new features to be used in .vvm in connection with strings. So what did we actually do to improve this situation, or how or what new features were actually implemented. So the first thing that I'd like to mention is the support for string interpolation. So string interpolation is probably quite known for .NET, and I'm pretty sure that developers from other languages as well. It's basically just a syntax sugar for calling methods such as string format or string concat, depending on how complex the interpolated expressions are. So what is actually string interpolation? I think it would be better displayed on some examples. So in the bottom part you can see 3 examples of on the topic of string interpolation. So you always start interpolated strings with $, exactly the same situation as in C#, and you can actually place in some specific places interpolated expressions that are encapsulated in curly brackets. These expressions will be evaluated to strings, and such string will be created for you at runtime. So this is a very simple example. If you were to have a name property inside your view model, this would be one way to create a greeting message for the user. And of course, we support more complex cases. For example, you might want to write a property such as datetime property and have it formatted in a specific way. So for this, we support the same feature as in C#, that you can actually specify your interpolated expression together with the colon, after which you write a specific formatting string, and this will yield the date time in this specific format. So if you are actually wondering what formats are supported, you might want to take a look at our documentation, and you would see that there are actually a lot of formats supported, as all of the formats that are commonly used in C#, except for some cases where some identifiers are not supported, but generally the support is really broad, and you can provide same format string that you are used to writing in other place of .vvm, but right now we created a new syntax that you can use them in. So you can use them in string interpolation as well. And string interpolation system also supports some more complex expressions, such as in the third example presented, but yeah, that's something that everybody would expect from this feature. So yeah, from .vvm 3.1 you can also use string interpolation. But this is not the only change that we did for strings in .vvm 3.1. We actually also added a lot of JavaScript translations that you can use in your value binding static commands and get and have them evaluated purely in client's browser. So what methods do we actually support on string? There are methods like contains, ends with, index of, null or empty, join, last index of, replace, split, starts with, to upper, to lower, and also their culture invariant versions. So yeah, I think that these are a lot new features that you can use in connections with strings. So yeah, we should now take a look at another feature on the list, and Right now I'll be talking about a couple of more features that I couldn't really place into other categories, or better said, I couldn't come up with a nice topic name for them, but they are not in any way less important than previous features. So yeah, let's get straight into it. So the first feature in this category that I'd like to go over is an introduction of extension methods to a .vvm data binding system. So yeah, you can use the import directive to specify what namespace you would like to .vvm to search for your custom extension methods. You may know this directive previously from .vvm. It was used to tell the compiler to where to look for certain symbols such as enums that you wanted to use in your data bindings. So right now what the import directive does is that it also searches these namespaces for extension methods. It actually works in a really similar way as compared to C#. So of course, the .vvm binding compiler always prefers non-extension methods whenever you write a method invocation. So only once there was no viable non-extension method found, the .vvm compiler will try to match at least with an extension method, and this is the case where it will go over your import directives and will try to find the method that you wish to call. There is one small exception. We added the namespace system link into default imports, so it's actually not necessary to write import system link into your .html files. So this is basically added by default. So these methods that I shown previously in the client-side demo and so on, you can use them without the import directive. So please use the import directive for your own namespaces where you provide your own extension methods. And I feel like this is a great extension point so that you can create some code that might be shared across multiple pages or even multiple projects. So yeah, since .vvm 3.1 we support this nice feature with import directive, and you can also use extension methods. So I've already shown you the usage of extension methods in previous samples. It's just that right now I wanted to talk a little bit more about them and how you too can use this in your application for custom extension methods. So the next feature that I'd like to talk about is various improvements when resolving methods and looking for what methods a user actually wanted to call. So the first important feature that we implemented is that we now support a variable number of arguments for methods. This is commonly known in C# as the methods with the params keyword, which allows for this nice little syntax that you can seamlessly write a variable number of arguments and it will be passed to the method as an array. It's already in use in .vvm by some by some JavaScript translations. And the other important improvement is the support for generic methods. So as I've been saying, .vvm improved its support for resolving and matching methods so that in from version .vvm 3.1, there is the possibility to use even more complex generic methods than it was possible before. So yeah, these are, I feel, all really nice improvements and changes that we did. And yeah, I wouldn't like to forget about math methods. So as I've been saying, we added a lot of JavaScript translations, and math methods weren't an exception, so we added a lot of translations here as well. You can see on the slide there are various mathematic functions that we now support, some of which are more, some of which are a little bit less common, but you may use them in your data bindings, and there are quite nice and simple operations that can be evaluated on the client side as well. So at this point, this was the last batch of JavaScript translations that I wanted to show you, and right now I'd like to show you what I wanted to show you in our documentation. So if you come and have a look at our documentation for .vvm 3.0 and up, there is a section under concepts called data binding, and under the data binding there is this nice page called supported expressions, and here you can actually see all the available syntax that you can use inside data bindings. There is a lot of it to go over, and there are also available .NET methods that are supported in value bindings that were previously supported, I mean up to version 3.0. So these methods are of course still supported, but in .vvm 3.1 we added a lot of them. So here you can find the whole list of supported methods and their overloads, as I've been speaking earlier about. So starting with the link namespace, there is a lot of them and various overloads. Then there are the list methods that you've seen in the example where we try to modify a list inside static commands. Then there is dictionary methods, a lot of string methods and their overloads, and lastly the math methods that I just show you on the last slide. So right now I'd like to summarize the changes in these versions. So in .vvm 3.0 we introduced lambda functions, and this feature was further improved in version 3.1 by adding type inference support. We added a lot of meta translations for various link operations that you can use together with collections to perform various operations in value bindings. We also added a lot of meta translations for common list operations, and we also added a couple operations of our own that we really like to use in our applications. This was also done in the version 3.1, and in version 3.1 we actually added support for dictionaries and also some other meta translations that you can use together with dictionaries. Once again, for example, in static commands to perform some modifications on these collections. And then in version 3.0 we added variables so that you can write some more complex commands in your applications that actually leverage the availability of variables. Then in version 3.1 we added string interpolation and various string methods so that you can write even more interesting data bindings in connection with strings. We also added support for the params keyword that you may use in your methods that might be called from data bindings. We did various generic improvements also in version 3.1. We added support for extension methods, and from the version 3.1 you can use the import directive as I've been talking earlier about, and of course math method translations in 3.1. So I hope that I did not forget any important feature in connection with data bindings. I hope that you really like this presentation, and that you realized how many new features there were implemented in the version 3.1, and that you will not forget to upgrade your applications to this version once it comes out. There is also a repository available for you that you can visit that has all the examples that I showed previously, and also these slides, so you can play with these new features. This repository is actually based on the latest preview of .vvm 3.1, which is really close to what will be actually the final release that should be hopefully out in a few days. So once again, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and if there are no questions, then I'd like to thank you once again for attending this presentation, and stay tuned as there is more to come today. So once again, thank you and bye.
Hey friends, welcome back. We are in front of the last session of today, and I will be showing a demo of hot reload functionality. I hope that you enjoyed the sessions that we had for you prepared today, and that you also join us tomorrow. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat. We will be going through the chat and responding to all your questions. If you have watched the latest Microsoft Build conference, which was, I think it was in May, so last month, they were talking about .NET 6 preview, and they were showing that .NET will support hot reload experience. What this means, basically, when you as a developer make some changes to your code, until now you had to just recompile the project, which typically takes a few seconds. Then you need to go to the browser, so I'm used to the Alt-Tab shortcut because I'm doing it a million times a day. And in the browser you just hit F5, so the page gets refreshed. And because it's the first request after restart of the application, it will also take few seconds because the process needs to start. There is the just-in-time compilation in .NET, and the application needs to initialize. If you are using Entity Framework, it will check the database schema, migrations. There can be a lot of things happening under the hood. So typically this loop, when you change the code and you want to try it in the browser, it can take 10 seconds, it can take 20 seconds. We had some projects, large projects in our company where it takes almost a minute. So it's quite annoying, and you are of course doing this many times a day. So if we can speed this process up, it would help everyone pretty dramatically. So the hot reload means that when you change the code, you will be able to just snap and try the functionality right away without waiting for the recompilation. So in .NET 6 preview, and it's already working. I have a demo of this functionality. What the .NET 6 can apply code changes into an existing process. There are two ways how to do it. You can use Visual Studio 16.11 preview. It's if you go to download Visual Studio page and download the preview version, that's the 16.11 release. And you need .NET 6 preview, so two previews, so it will work. Or you can, if you don't have the preview Visual Studio, like me on my machine, but you have .NET 6 preview, you can also run the project from command line using .NET Watch. So either you need to use the preview Visual Studio or you need to use .NET Watch. And basically what happens is that when you change the code and save the changes, then .NET Watch will take these new files and try to compile it, but it won't kill the web application and start a new process. It will just send the code changes to the process and modify the code inside of the running process. Basically, I hope that I understand how it works correctly, but they are just comparing the intermediate language, the MSIL, between those two processes, and if they find a method that has different body, they can just take the body and inject it to the new process, which means that the process is still running, everything is initialized, but when you call the method, the new body will be used. They can also change the declaration of objects, like adding new properties and new stuff. Of course, there are many limitations. You can see in the Microsoft documentation what's currently supported. And on the .vvm side, if you change something inside a method in the view model or any other method anywhere else in the process, it will just work because .vvm will just try to call the new method and it will work. There is some additional work we need to do in the framework to support, for example, adding new properties to the view model. Because right now .vvm cannot handle that. because once you load the page, all types that are being used on the page, so for example the default view model class, it's on many places .vvm caches a lot of information, and we often use this type as a cache key. So we need to hook up on the .NET 6 runtime event, which is there. I've seen it on GitHub. So we need to hook at this event and clean up our caches. So we will see that, okay, this type has changed. So we need to throw all the cached information about this type. Once the application gets another HTTP request using this view model, it won't be cached, so it will be created from the new definition. So I hope that we will succeed in supporting also this. But right now you can try, if you change the method body in the view model, the change will be applied right away without application restart. So that's the first part. What happens if you change the code in the view model? And there is also a second part, which takes place when you change the markup files. So if you change something in the dot HTML file, and this is not the .NET runtime concern, this is .vvm concern. So we have an extension package that can watch changes in these files, and if it detects that some markup file was changed, it can refresh the page. And because the view model can be used to represent the state of the page, that what we are doing is basically that we will back the view model up, and after the page is refreshed, we will restore it to the original state. So if you have filled some information in the page and then change the markup, then you won't lose these changes. So this will also speed you up, because if it needs 5 clicks to get the page to some state you need to test, and then you can change the code and the page will refresh, but it will still be in the state as it was previously. So if you want to try this, you can install .vvm NuGet package called .vvm.diagnostics.view-hot-reload, and you need to register it on 2 places. First in .vvm startup, which basically just registers .vvm services and infrastructure. And because this package is using SignalR, you also need to register the middleware in a startup CS. Yeah, so there are 2 lines you need to add to your startup on .NET Core. In old ASP.NET, we have also a package for old ASP.NET. Then there is only startup CS, so it's not so difficult. But in principle, it's almost the same. So the page gets refreshed automatically. So let's see the demo. I have the link to the repo where you can see also the source code of this feature, because actually it's not a feature of the framework, it's an external NuGet package you install. We don't need to change anything in the .vvm framework until we dig into some other areas where it might be needed. Okay, so I have a Visual Studio right here. It's strange. Okay, this is very practical size of the window. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, let's open it on half of the screen. And because I don't have Visual Studio Preview installed on this machine, I have my command line here. So sorry that it's like that. Okay, I'm zoom out. And I hope I am in the correct folder. So yeah, it looks like the correct one. Yeah, so this is the root folder of my application. You can see the views and view models folders. So let's run .NET Watch. Okay, and if you have .NET 6 preview, you will see this line hot reload enabled. Yeah, and here is here is a link to the docs, so you can see what features are currently supported. If you do some unsupported change in your code, you can just press Ctrl-R and it will do a full restart of the process. So not everything will be supported, because of course if you change something that is incompatible with objects that are already initialized in memory, then a lot of things can break. So For many changes it will be supported, but on some changes it will need to restart the process. Okay, so it launched the browser. So I have the browser and I have my Visual Studio here. I can make it a little bit. Okay. So this is my page and this is my view model. So first let's change some things in the markup. So for example, I can add new paragraph and say, hey, .vvm, Thomas here. And once I save it, you can see that this window on the left side, it just refreshed. And if I fill some information here and change the markup again, for example, let's make it red. So once I save the file, you can see that the state is persisted. So whatever you do to the page, the state will stay there because we save it in the session storage before we reload the page, and after the .vvm is initialized, we then take the saved state and apply it back on the view model. By the way, we are doing it using the .vvm.state and .vvm.patch_state functions I have been showing in the previous session. So it's quite easy, and this is on GitHub. So if you are interested in how this auto refresh works, just go to the repo and see how it looks like. So this will allow you, if you have two displays, for example, to have the page open on one display and to have the code on the other display, and you just change the .dot.html file and you will see the changes practically immediately. Of course, if you make some mistake in the markup, for example, you can do a compile error, then you will see an error page. When you fix it, it should refresh the page. I'm not sure why it's not working right now, but we will make it work too. So even if you get the error page, the script that does the refresh should be injected in the page. So it should also work. So the error, once you fix the issue, the error page will just disappear and the page should return to the original state. Okay, so that's if you change. That's what happens if you change the markup. So let's now try to change some logic. So when I click on this send greetings, I'm getting the hello and first name last name message here. So let's change something in the view model. So there is the change title method, which is called by this button, and so let's say hello.vvm, and I save it and click, and it's there. It takes about half second because .NET Watch needs to recompare what's changed and inject it in the process. But if we don't have the .NET 6, it would take about 2 or 3 seconds. This is very simple app, so no initialization, but still the start of the process and configuration of everything takes about 2 to 3 seconds. So let's try it again. First name, and saving, and one, and it's there. So it's much faster. Maybe if I can, and I'm not sure how to do this. I can move the Visual Studio to be like this, so we can also see the shell, because we should see some things there. So when I change it back to .vvm, you can see file changed, and it should be here. I can it's difficult to position all those windows on this small display, but final attempt. So I changed the code. Hot reload of changes succeeded. So once you see the hot reload of changes succeeded, it means that the function is available in the process. So it's really fast. It's much faster than restarting the application. And if you need to connect to the database and check some things in the startup, that's where it can save a lot of time. So that's the hot reload. If you want to use it in your own application, there are a few things you need to do. First, you need to install the NuGet package. So if I look in the CSproj file, I have a project reference here because I'm in the repo. But if you install .vvm diagnostics view hot reload ASP.NET Core NuGet package, if you are on OWin, then there will be OWin instead of ASP.NET Core. So if you install a package which is named like this, then you have the extension ready to use, and you just need to in startup you need to map .vvm view hot reload, which basically maps the signal R hub that sends a message to the page when something is changed. And also in .vvm startup you need to in configure services just add .vvm view hot reload. So it's not difficult, 2 lines of code that will help you doing this. So install NuGet package, configure in .vvm startup, and configure in startup, and it should work. If you want to hot reload in the C# code, you need .NET 6 preview. Unfortunately, I have tried the latest preview of Visual Studio 2019, and the .vvm extension is crashing, so the experience is not very good. If you want to try to use it, I recommend using .NET Watch. There is also one more thing. ASP.NET Core automatically includes page refresh functionality in .NET Watch. If that works for ASP.NET Core and Blazor and other frameworks, because they don't know about us much, so they implemented this functionality generically, but it cannot store and restore the state of the view model. So that's why we have our own hot refresh solution. However, if you are using it from .NET Watch, you will need to set one environment variable which turns off the ASP.NET Core built-in page reload, because these were just colliding and it was causing issues. So if you go, I have this configure.NET Watch here. Basically, I'm setting an environment variable .NET Watch suppress browser refresh to 1. Yeah, this will turn off the default ASP.NET Core browser refresh script being injected in the page, and it will allow the .vvm version to work. Right now I don't have any other solution, but that's what we are working on to make sure that if you install our package, that we will disable the ASP.NET Core browser refresh somehow, so these two didn't collide. It's still a preview, so you need to set this environment variable. Okay. So that's the hot reload demo. I'm sure that at the time where .NET 6 is released, this will be supported from the first day in .vvm, and we will also include it in the default project template in Visual Studio. So once you do file new project .vvm, you will have the hot reload already configured, so you won't need to do anything special. Yeah, because I think that it's very useful for speeding up the development of .vvm applications. Okay, so that was the last demo for today. I hope to see you tomorrow. We are starting at 1 p.m. Central Europe summertime. And of course, because it's on YouTube, there will be recordings of the sessions, and if you come up late, it's not a problem, because you can move back in the stream. Tomorrow we will be talking about Fluent UI and web components. You will see .vvm in action with ML.NET, machine learning things. You will see how to set up CI/CD pipelines using GitHub Actions, and I will be talking about what you can look forward to in .vvm 4.0. And I have a final slide here. We will be happy to get new contributors to the .vvm project. So if you work with .vvm, if you find a problem or just a typo in the documentation, whatever, please reach out to us, create issue on GitHub. If you are brave enough to write some code, we will be happy for any pull requests. We have, if you look in the issues, we have some issues marked as a good first issue, which are quite simple tasks that if you don't have much experience with building frameworks, you can start with. And of course, if you reach out to us on how to do it, we will help you. So if you want to join and contribute to the project, we will be very happy. And of course, also if you can help us by spreading the word that you are using .vvm, it's awesome. Okay, go try it, or writing blog posts, anything. Just let us know. We will be very happy. We have a Gitter chat on gitter.im/riganti/.vvm. So in the URL of GitHub repo, you just replace GitHub with Gitter, and you should be there. Entire .vvm team is listening this conversation. So if you have any problems, you need to help with something, let us know. We will be happy to help you. And follow us on our social media, so you will be notified about other events that we will be doing. We are doing regular monthly meetups, which are also quite interesting, and you can see what's cooking in the .vvm kitchen right now. So I hope that you like .vvm and that you can use it, that it will help you to build new web apps and to modernize old web forms apps if you have some. So thank you, and see you tomorrow. Goodbye.